Well, the murder of George Floyd also had a big impact on workplaces all across the country, even in the midst of the pandemic. ABC 13 reporter Nick Notario joins us live with some of the changes that companies have been making and what else can be done. Nick?
Yeah, Mel, remember after the murder of George Floyd, so many companies took to social media. Here are just some of them that you saw shortly after his death. And, you know, this incident created a lot of companies to speak out in a way that they never have before. They also made changes at the workplace. Now, a year later, we wanted to take a look at how the discussion about diversity and inclusion has changed at the workplace.
At the George Floyd Memorial in Houston's 3rd Ward, some of the flowers might be worn, but the impacts of his death are still fresh on people's minds. Not just on police reform, but how we all work.
That's why it became no longer just about police brutality. It was in the office, because we couldn't just keep it there. We couldn't turn it off.
Shantara Chapman runs Power Her Consulting. She says over the past year, companies spoke out, heard from employees, and invested in change.
I would love to see a more open and honest dialogue continue, because the one thing that a lot of companies are not allowing for is the continuation.
In Houston, the death of Floyd was felt in its largest industry, energy. Ally Energy CEO Katie Maynard says oil and gas companies that were once silent on these issues are now making change.
I was impressed to see there were some company leaders who stepped up and immediately responded to what happened.
A recent Accenture study looking at diversity and inclusion in the workplace found 2/3 of leaders believe they create an empowering environment. Just 1/3 of employees agree. To change this, one way is hiring a chief diversity officer. Carlicia Wright held that position with the city of Houston. She was recently hired by Lone Star College.
You put yourself out there when you did a Black Lives Matter post, and so now folks are looking for it. And that unavoidable transparency will actually start to permeate in the workplace, and people in the workplace will start to ask questions.
A year later, Wright says improvements have been made, but don't be discouraged if you're not satisfied with your employer.
This is not a short-term endeavor. It's really a long-term, it's a marathon when you think about it.
A long-term investment you're likely to continue to see in the workplace well beyond this year's 1-year mark.
I'm hopeful that there's real change.
Now, moving the needle forward also means continuing to make change in the workplace. And Eyewitness News at 6:30, we're going to tell you how you can do that at your job. Plus, for all the employers out there that may be seeing this, you might think, okay, we don't really need to do this. But we're going to show you that's not the case. We're going to explain how talent, especially recent college grads, are not just looking at that salary and why they may go elsewhere if you don't make these improvements. Live in Fort Bend County, Nick Notario, ABC 13 Eyewitness News.
All right, Nick, great perspective. Thank you.
And the murder of George Floyd prompted many companies to not only speak publicly about social justice, some made important changes in their workplaces. But what can you do if change needs to happen where you work? ABC 13 reporter Nick Notario shows us what you can do and why employers need to pay attention to this. Nick?
Well, if you're discouraged at work, maybe you feel like not enough is being done, experts say give it time. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you want to improve diversity and inclusion at the workplace, there are steps you can take. And for employers, well, they need to take this seriously because prospective employees are taking a look at what they're posting online, and they're also paying attention to what's happening in the workplace.
After a summer of protests, this summer is all about seeing change. As new graduates look for jobs, executives know candidates are focused on more than salary.
We're seeing a shift of people who are taking jobs that are about meaning and making a difference. And that means feeling like I belong and I'm being included here.
Ally Energy CEO Katie Maynard says diversity and inclusion is more important than ever before.
These are elements that candidates want. And if you don't have a culture of inclusion, you could have the best product, the best service, you are not going to win.
Lone Star College's Chief Diversity Officer, Carlicia Wright, sees it firsthand on campus.
Young people want to talk about it, similar to, they don't just want to talk about it on college campuses. They're spending a great deal of time in the workplace, and so they're interested in creating forums where they can talk about it at work.
Diversity and inclusion is something more candidates are looking for in companies. If you're job searching, take a look at what the company says on social media. Look at the makeup of executives and ask employees what the culture is like. To improve it, experts say companies should invest in diversity and inclusion and make sure it's done right.
To my disappointment, I saw a lot of companies use their black staff that were already in place and say, hey, we need you to go and run a meeting and tell people about your experiences. That's absolutely not fair.
A discussion that started last year on streets and social media, playing out now in the workplace for years to come. Nick Notario, ABC 13 Eyewitness News.